Hey, Jonathan here. One of the subscribers on my mailing list sent in a question that I get quite a bit, so I figured I'd answer it here and maybe I could reference this in the future. And that question is, how did I get started in consulting? How did Jonathan get started in consulting? So how I got started in consulting was I was working at Staples, the office supply superstore. I was in the advertising department. They had like an internal advertising department, and I was in the tech group. We did the computer stuff. And I learned an application called FileMaker while I was there to kind of create streamlined workflow systems for the employees. Maybe there were a couple hundred employees, I think. Feels like that was about right. And I created this application that they could use to make paper catalogs, if you can imagine that. So this was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I was feeling pretty cocky because it was a big success. And those folks and my managers and their bosses used this system a lot. It was like a big deal, and they ended up continuing to use it for years after I left. It was a very big deal at the time. I was super cocky about it, had a big ego, thought I knew everything about this program, FileMaker, and eventually, because of that, and various other, I just wasn't a good fit for a corporate environment. So I ended up getting dissatisfied with the position, and I put my resume out there to outside FileMaker consulting firms. There are quite a few FileMaker consulting firms. I think there still are. And I sent my resume out to what I considered to be three of the big ones. I interviewed with two of them. I got a job at one of them, my favorite pick, which was amazing. And I moved to Atlanta to work with the owner. So it was like super great opportunity. What I found out very quickly was that my confidence in the skill that I had was misplaced. I was I was in the owner's words, an intermediate developer. Yeah, he didn't say mediocre, but that's how it felt. And that was a real blow to my ego, but the facts were incontrovertible. For example, when I was at Staples, I only had to support Mac users, and most of the world at that time were not on Macs. So right out of the gate, I didn't know diddly about Windows. So I had to completely learn like the Windows operating system so that I could help service our clients where I, go to their, at the time, a lot of the work was local. We did some remote, but I had to learn how to use Windows. I didn't know how, I mean, it sounds probably silly to somebody that knows Windows, but it wasn't the same as Mac way back then, which would have been, I don't even know what operating systems it was, like Windows 95, I think. So that a lot of people were still using. And then the platform had idiosyncrasies on Windows. Anyway, I learned very quickly that I didn't know as much as I thought I knew about the platform. I probably was only halfway there. I was intermediate as assessed. And the other thing that I didn't know squat about was working with clients. It's very different than working for a manager who you report to and your colleagues that, you're all kind of in the same boat. When you walk into, I don't know, an office full of people who fix forklift trucks or sell used luxury watches or whatever, you go into one of these clients and they had their own little ecosystem. You're this weird outsider, this egghead who's going to work on the system, and the sort of, call it soft skills or whatever, just the consulting skills of meeting them, getting them to trust me with this thing that was probably mission critical for their business. Even if it was a small business, it's mission critical to them. So going in and being able to get enough trust from them that they would let me even look at it because it was full of sensitive data, a lot of times financials, and then work on it in a way that wasn't going to put them out of business or have significant downtime. So there was a lot to learn there in terms of consulting. And had I gone solo directly from corporate, I think I would have had a very, very hard time with the pieces of the job that aren't the direct technical skill. As I said, I was very confident in my technical skills. I would have found out that I was actually in over my head, especially on Windows. But the thing that I really learned a lot from my boss at the time was how to deal with customers, how to build trust with them, what to say, what not to say, how to dress, how to act. And it wasn't like a radical change, but it was a little less casual than I would normally be, and not dramatically. I didn't have to like put on an act or anything, but it was there's a level of professionalism that is expected when you're selling professional services. So that was a big learning curve, and I had a lot less to learn. I had a lot to learn about my technical skills, but I had a lot more to learn about just client relationships and that sort of thing. So how long was I there? I was there for 3 years, and I felt like, I would say within a year or two, year and a half, let's say, it took me about that long to get up to a comfort level where I felt like I could drop into pretty much any professional setting and immediately have people trust me and be like, okay, this person knows what they're doing for whatever reason. Um, Partially the way that I would present myself and the way that I would speak, but it was also things I was doing outside, like writing for the magazine and increasing my reputation in the community so that my reputation would precede me in a good way. And so when I got there, it was already like, okay, this person is an expert. We trust him, that he knows what he's doing. And then I didn't ruin that trust by showing up in sweatpants or swearing or just like things that might sound obvious to most people, but were not necessarily obvious to me, and certainly not obvious to everyone I worked with. So we brought in people, toward the end of my time there, I was managing people, and we would bring on new hires. It was we would give them a test to test their technical skills, but that was kind of like just basic table stakes. If they needed to be able to present themselves professionally to people who were paying us $150 an hour to work on mission critical systems that had proprietary secret data inside of them. So you really needed to come across as someone who, maybe I could almost say had something to lose. So had a reputation, had built up some trust, either on the spot or a combination of on the spot with your demeanor and presentation and so forth, but also the things that you did outside to increase your reputation and authority, and then not ruin it with something silly. So you had something to lose. So you'd go in there, and they could recognize that your livelihood depended on you doing a really good job and making them really happy. And that was a major learning curve for me. So again, I would say it took about 12 to 18 months before I started to feel pretty comfortable with it. I think that's maybe even a little bit accelerated because the owner at the time, Chris, my boss, he would drop me into the deep end all the time. So I got a lot of on-the-job training very quickly. So that was quite an experience. One thing that so then how did I actually get started? So that was sort of the beginning of how I got started in consulting. And then when I went out on my own in end of 2005 into 2006, I moved back to Rhode Island. I was going to go solo. The reason I was going to go solo was not because of any problem with the firm. It was because I wanted to stop billing hourly. And I didn't know how to do that. I knew I had to go to fixed prices of some kind, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I ended up finding value pricing as an option, which worked great, but I didn't know that at the time, and I didn't want to risk the cash flow, the revenue, the reputation of the firm by trying to switch to something I didn't even know what it was. And there were 10, 12 employees. They all depended on payroll. They depended on us to make payroll every month so they could pay their mortgage. So I didn't want to play around with that. It felt too risky to me, so I went solo. So that's when I truly got started in consulting on my own. That was when I first had my own consulting business. And the switch from the firm to solo was greatly aided by my relationship with my boss, the owner boss of the previous place where I was working. I had such a close relationship with the clients that I was working on that we worked out a split, and I took those clients with me and did like a revenue share as I continued those. So I got a real nice ramp into my own thing. So that was cool. And that's something that a lot of people can do, even if you don't do this sort of interim step of working at a firm or an agency or some middle step where you're learning the craft of consulting or advisory work where you're going into somebody else's company and advising them. You're not talking to like people that are colleagues in your own company. It's fairly common, and you could perhaps work this out if you had a good relationship with your direct manager or someone above them. You could give your notice and say, I'm going solo. I'm going to be doing this technical skill on my own. I'm going to hang out my own shingle. I actually like this job. It's just time for me to try something, build my own business. I would absolutely love if you would be my first customer, where I could essentially do the things that I'm doing now, but just on a different, essentially in a different type of engagement. So a different compensation approach where they would be paying you in some way, but you're not a W-2 employee, you're not a full-time employee, you're now a consultant of some kind. Maybe you're a freelancer. It depends on how advanced you are in terms of like what technical skill you do have. And then you bill them either, hopefully not by the hour, but maybe if that's how you have to get started, then okay, fine. It could be weekly, could be monthly. It could be based on outcomes. It could be on a project basis where, you know, you're about to start a project. You're an employee at this company. They're about to start this big project. You decide to go solo. You could perhaps give them a fixed price for a project that they want done that has, you know, an end date, like a desired outcome, a clear win, a clear target, a clear objective. And then once you reach that objective, you're done. So never mind the business model that you decide to use or the way that you monetize your expertise when you do go solo. It is, I would say, I don't know, maybe 30% of the time I hear about people where they went solo and they had such a good relationship with their employer, their previous employer, that they end up consulting or freelancing for them as on some basis, which can get you your baseline cash flow that you need to start to spin up the marketing efforts that you need to in order to get your own thing going and bringing in new clients, not just your old employer. Anyway, I've talked way longer than I thought I was going to. Hopefully that's helpful. That's how I got started in consulting. Maybe that'll be helpful for you to get started in consulting. But if you have comments or questions or whatever, leave them on the video, or you could email them to me. That'd be great too. You can go to my website, jonathanstark.com, and it's pretty easy to find my email. All right, that's all for now.